My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 41 years old. A father, husband and man who thought he'd finally found peace after a chaotic upbringing. I married into a family that was loud, wealthy, and very performative in their love. At first I found it charming. Traditions, big parties, the matching pajamas at Christmas, but over time, something quieter settled beneath their smiles. Something colder. My wife Sarah, kind to the bone, always tried to smooth the edges. And I tried to stay out of the family's politics until it touched my daughter. That Christmas Eve, their big suburban house was lit up like a department store. Candles, carols, everything perfect on the outside. My daughter Ellie, just 8, sat with the other kids on the floor, legs crisscrossed in anticipation. Her little hands clapped every time a name was called and a gift was passed across the room. Her cousins opened dolls, drones, books with golden bows. Even the toddler second cousin from Georgia, who barely knew anyone, got a gift. I saw Ellie's smile shrink with each unopened space in front of her, but she said nothing. Just placed her hands in her lap and looked at the twinkling lights. No one noticed. Or maybe they did. My mother-in-law was busy orchestrating photos, yelling "Say Christmas," while my father-in-law passed out hot cider like nothing had happened. Sarah kept glancing at me, her face unreadable. I gripped the armrest of my chair, the quiet betrayal sinking into my chest like ice. This wasn't a mistake. Not from these people. Not from the family that once asked me privately if I was sure I wanted to raise a child that isn't fully ours. My daughter isn't biologically Sarah's, but she is ours. Entirely. Ellie turned her eyes to the ground, then up at me, and smiled. A soft, practiced smile, like she didn't want me to be sad. That smile broke something in me I didn't know, still had cracks. I wanted to say something, to stand and demand answers, to burn that perfect tree down with every word they deserved. But I didn't. I couldn't teach Ellie that dignity can be tossed away just because others don't know how to carry it. That's when Sarah stood up and said, "There's one more gift. It was supposed to be opened last." Her voice was calm, clear, almost rehearsed. All the chatter stopped. Forks paused mid-air. Her mother blinked like she'd seen a ghost. Sarah walked over to Ellie and handed her a white envelope with a gold seal. Ellie looked up, confused. Everyone else looked embarrassed, but no one spoke. My hands were clenched so tightly, my knuckles hurt. But I didn't move. I just watched as the quietest girl in the room opened the one thing that none of them expected. And that was exactly the point. Ellie opened the envelope slowly, her small fingers carefully peeling back the seal like it was made of something sacred. Inside was a single folded letter, and tucked within that, an official-looking certificate and a photograph. I already knew what it was. Sarah and I had planned this months ago, long before we knew how cold the room would be that night. But what I hadn't expected was the silence. Thick, bitter silence from every direction. All those people who had so much to say an hour ago suddenly couldn't speak at all. Ellie looked up at Sarah. "What is it?" she asked softly. Sarah smiled and knelt beside her. "It means you own something now, something that's yours forever." Ellie blinked, confused. Sarah helped her hold the certificate so others could see. "This is the deed to 1 acre of protected woodland. It's in your name. And this," she pointed to the photo, "is where we'll build the treehouse you designed. The one you drew with the rope ladder and the skylight. Your place. No one can take that from you." I saw the shift then, just a flicker on my father-in-law's face. A twitch of something between confusion and insult. As if Sarah had broken an unspoken rule. The rest of the family stared, not at the paper, but at Ellie, like they were seeing her for the first time and realizing they didn't have a piece of her, and they never would. The thing about betrayal is it's not always loud. It's not always someone stealing your money or slamming a door. Sometimes it's 100 little exclusions. A pause when your child walks into the room, a forgotten invitation, a comment dressed as a joke. Over the years, I had convinced myself that staying silent was the mature thing, that not rocking the boat made me strong. But watching Ellie sit there, unsure if she had done something wrong just by existing, I knew my silence had cost more than I imagined. Sarah had seen it long before I had. She watched the way her family tilted, just slightly away from Ellie, in group photos. She saw how they greeted her with less enthusiasm, offered her the second-hand compliments, and to Sarah's credit, she never once asked me to fix it. She just made a plan, quiet, steady, and unshakable. That envelope wasn't a gift, it was a declaration, a quiet strike, one that didn't need raised voices or confrontation to cut deep. That night, as the party slowly fizzled into stiff goodbyes and half-hearted hugs, I held Ellie's hand and whispered, "You did nothing wrong. They just don't know how to love someone as special as you." She nodded, resting her head on my arm. I knew then that the real gift wasn't the land. It was the moment she realized she didn't need their approval, that she had something stronger, her own worth, and a mother who defended it without ever drawing her sword. In the weeks that followed, no one mentioned the Christmas envelope, not a text, not a call. It was as if the family collectively decided to erase the moment from memory, like it had threatened something too sacred in their performance of unity. But the silence said everything. I could feel the tension in every shallow greeting, every forced smile. And Sarah, she carried on as if nothing had happened, making Ellie's favorite lunches, reviewing treehouse sketches, booking a cabin trip near the woodland property. But beneath her calm, I could feel the precision of her resolve. She wasn't done. Not yet. Sarah never asked for revenge. She never said, "Let's teach them a lesson." But I saw the way she organized the next family gathering on neutral ground. At a rented community hall, I saw the way she curated the guest list, quietly excluding those who had always excluded Ellie. And when her father asked why certain names were left out, she simply replied, "This one's just for the kids who see her." That word, "see," carried more weight than 100 arguments ever could. But it wasn't just emotional leverage we discovered. It was financial. See, Sarah had quietly built a grant foundation in her name 2 years prior, aimed at supporting children from blended families and non-traditional households. She had used a portion of her inheritance money that her family assumed was still untouched to fund it, and it had grown. Subtly, strategically, her name was beginning to appear on school boards, in parent forums, and even a few local interviews. The very family who had ignored Ellie was now watching their own daughter become a symbol of what they had tried to pretend didn't exist. I began to play my own part too. At work, I was promoted to regional strategy lead, a title that came with influence, and with that, access to a new pool of investors and donors. I connected Sarah's foundation to 2 major corporate partners. I didn't advertise it. I didn't post about it. I just let it circulate. Quiet power, silent wins. Every signature on those donation checks made their silence louder. What they didn't realize was that the girl they once ignored was becoming the face of something much bigger than their living room performances. Ellie had started writing letters to kids like her, other children who felt unseen in their own families. She was 8, but she wrote with a wisdom that had clearly come from pain we would never let her carry alone again. One night, while helping her pin her letters to a corkboard, I asked, "Why do you think they didn't give you a gift that night?" She looked up and said, "Maybe they thought I wouldn't notice." Then she smiled. "But I did. And I'm okay now." That's when I knew we weren't planning revenge anymore. We were building something they could never touch. The next family event was Easter. Normally, it was held at the estate Sarah's parents owned, complete with a manicured lawn, egg hunts led by hired actors, and a photographer pretending to capture spontaneous moments. But this year Sarah took the reins. She rented out a nature preserve near Ellie's newly deeded land. No glitz, just trees, wildflowers and laughter that didn't need staging. It was a bold move, and she didn't ask for permission. She simply sent an email. Easter will be held here, come if you like. The fallout was immediate. Her mother called, voice trembling with indignation. You're turning your back on family tradition. Sarah's response was surgical. No, I'm turning toward something better. And she didn't raise her voice once. Her father asked if there would be space for everyone. A not-so-subtle jab at the idea of being among the public. She smiled and said, "Of course. Everyone who shows love gets a seat." The silence that followed on the phone told us everything. They were losing their control, not because of confrontation, but because they couldn't define the rules anymore. At the Easter gathering, something shifted. Ellie ran among children. She actually played with friends from her school, neighbors, even foster kids. Sarah had quietly supported through her foundation. No forced photos, no performative speeches, just joy, real joy. And as the kids hunted eggs, Sarah stood beside me and whispered, "Do you see it? This is what happens when you build instead of beg." I nodded. The revenge had already happened. It didn't need fire. It needed clarity. And now we had it. What neither of us anticipated was how quickly her family would unravel. Rumors began surfacing. One cousin mentioned how Sarah was withholding family funds. Another accused her of embarrassing the family name. What they didn't understand was that Sarah had never needed to confront them directly. She just rewrote everything they assumed they had control over. Attention, influence, even tradition. All it took was consistency and a refusal to be provoked. Her father, once the unchallenged patriarch, suddenly found himself uninvited to 2 board meetings. One of the chairmen, an old friend of mine, had donated significantly to Sarah's foundation. When asked about the change, he simply said, "We're aligning with more inclusive leadership now." I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to explain. This wasn't war. This was evolution. The hardest part was watching them try to claw back relevance. They started showing up to events we hosted, bringing gifts. Too many, too late. Suddenly, Ellie was their special girl in every conversation. But she saw through it. One afternoon she turned to Sarah and said, "They're only nice now because people are watching." Sarah kissed her forehead and replied, "That's why we make sure the right people keep watching." By summer, the shift was undeniable. The family that once held center stage in every gathering had become background noise. People stopped asking when the next holiday would be at the big house. They started asking when Ellie's next fundraiser was, when Sarah's foundation would speak again, or how to volunteer at the woodland event she now organized for children with blended or broken family histories. The silence from her parents wasn't just awkward anymore. It was deafening, and for them, it was humiliating. They tried, of course, to reclaim the image. Her mother emailed Sarah an apology that read more like a resume, listing all the charities she'd once supported, how in her heart she always saw Ellie as one of them. Sarah didn't reply, not because she was bitter, but because she no longer needed to validate herself through their words. She didn't want revenge. She wanted truth. And in that silence, her truth spoke louder than any reply could. The final unraveling happened quietly. Her father's long-standing role on the board of an elite private school was restructured after a parent coalition flagged several patterns of exclusion in the donor program, patterns tied directly to him. I had nothing to do with the investigation, But one of the coalition members had attended our Easter event and was inspired by Sarah's speech on fairness in family systems. That's how integrity works. It multiplies behind the scenes. You don't always see the justice forming, but it forms nonetheless. One evening we received a package at our door. It was from her parents. Inside was a handwritten note addressed to Ellie, apologizing for the oversight on Christmas, alongside a necklace that had belonged to Sarah's grandmother. Sarah read the note, then folded it back into the envelope without a word. She handed the necklace to Ellie and simply said, "You don't need their guilt to know you matter." Ellie nodded. There were no tears, no melodrama, just the kind of strength that's only born after you've seen what silence can build. I sometimes wonder how many people are walking around, aching from being overlooked, carrying the weight of not being chosen, especially in rooms where they should have been celebrated. I know that pain now. I watched it sit on my daughter's shoulders that night by the Christmas tree, and I also watched her rise above it, not with anger, but with grace that left no space for bitterness to grow. There's a kind of justice that doesn't come from punishment, but from elevation. You don't need to drag anyone down. You just need to rise so far above them that they no longer know how to reach you. And that's exactly what we did. Without ever raising our voices, without ever seeking applause, we just refused to stay beneath the table where love was passed out like a prize. We built our own table under the trees, with enough seats for everyone who knew how to truly see a child like Ellie. The following Christmas, we didn't attend the family gathering. We weren't angry. We weren't making a statement. We were simply somewhere else, deep in the woods, surrounded by snow-covered pines, just the three of us. Ellie had finally gotten her treehouse. Sarah and I helped her hang fairy lights around the wooden railings. There was a reading nook inside, shelves lined with her drawings, and a trapdoor that led to a quiet space she called her thinking floor. She said it was where she wrote letters she never sent, like the one she wrote after that first Christmas when she got nothing. We drank cocoa by the fire that night, not once checking our phones, not once wondering who missed us, because we weren't missing anything. The absence of certain people didn't hurt anymore. Their absence was now space. Space for peace, space for joy, space for love that didn't ask us to perform or shrink. That was the freedom we hadn't known we were missing all along. Ellie asked me, "Do you think they're still mad?" I thought about it. Maybe, but if they are, it's only because they thought we'd always need their approval, and now we don't. She smiled and sipped her cocoa. That moment was everything I'd ever hoped for. Not revenge, not a reversal of pain, just stillness. Just knowing we'd built something they couldn't tarnish, not with gifts, not with guilt, not even with time. Sarah later told me that letting go of her parents wasn't the hard part. The hardest part, she said, was realizing they were never truly holding us to begin with. We were holding ourselves in place, trying to be accepted by people who saw love as a transaction. But now, we didn't have to trade anymore. We had it all in our own home, in our own hands. Some of the extended family tried to reach out again in the new year. Not with apologies, but with invitations. A barbecue here, a birthday party there. We didn't block them. We didn't burn any bridges. We just stopped crossing the ones that led back to places where Ellie had once been invisible. And the strangest thing happened. Without our energy feeding the dynamic, their stage slowly dimmed. They say time heals, but I don't think time does anything without intention. We had to choose healing. We had to walk away from tradition to protect truth. And in doing so, we didn't just protect our daughter, we restored ourselves, fully, quietly, powerfully. Months passed. Spring arrived like a promise, and Sarah's foundation flourished. What began as a quiet project turned into a movement. Families wrote to her, mothers, stepdads, guardians, People who had also witnessed the sting of being overlooked, of being made to feel not real enough. She began organizing retreats on our woodland property, not just for kids, but for caregivers who'd never had a space to process their own wounds. The treehouse became more than Ellie's sanctuary. It became a symbol of safe belonging. Ellie gave a small speech at one of the retreats. She was just 9 by then, but when she stood beneath those trees with a microphone clipped to her coat, there was a stillness in the air that felt sacred. "Not everyone who shares your blood will protect you," she said, "but you can still grow something better with the people who choose you." Adults wept. Strangers hugged her. Sarah held my hand, and I realized something profound. We weren't just healing from a betrayal, we were building something generational. The news eventually picked up the story. A local outlet did a short piece on Ellie's Letters of Light project, a collection of anonymous messages from kids who'd felt excluded by their own families, now preserved in a public archive. The segment was picked up nationally. Donations poured in, and once again Sarah's family stayed silent. Not even a congratulations, just more quiet denial, as the world finally recognized the light they tried to dim. I learned that real justice often wears no armor. It doesn't arrive with a shout or a courtroom verdict. It shows up in the spaces where your joy is undeniable, where your presence becomes so full that their absence no longer matters. That's what we were living now. Not just peace, but purpose. Sarah's father finally requested a private meeting. He wanted to clear the air. She agreed to meet him. But not alone, she brought Ellie. And at that table in a quiet cafe, she let her father speak. Apologies wrapped in justifications, sorrow hidden behind pride. But Sarah said only this: "You don't need to fix it anymore. You just need to sit with it. We already forgave you, but we're not coming back." Afterward, Ellie asked, "Was that okay to say?" Sarah kissed her forehead. "That was perfect. Forgiveness isn't always a door we reopen. Sometimes it's just the one we close gently and walk away from forever." The more we grew, the more we realized what we had never really known. Love that doesn't compare, attention that doesn't measure, and family that doesn't exclude. Ellie's confidence blossomed, not in response to the old wounds, but in the light of what she was surrounded by now. She began painting. She published her first children's book. She learned the cello. She laughed more often. I often sat on the porch, overlooking the woods, wondering how differently things might have gone if we had spoken up sooner. But then again, perhaps the quiet path, the slow, deliberate one, was the only one that could have led us here. Had we exploded that Christmas night, had we fought fire with fire, we might have burned down more than the room. We might have scorched the soil where this new life took root. The invitations eventually stopped coming altogether. Sarah's family faded into a distant hum, still alive, still performing, but no longer able to touch us. And that was the best outcome of all. Not punishment, not exile, but irrelevance. When someone's power over you disappears entirely, there's nothing left to take back. You're just free. One evening, I found an old photo in a drawer. It was from a Christmas years ago. Before any of this, Ellie was 4. Sarah was holding her, and I could see the tension in her smile back then. We were still pretending. I looked at that photo, then looked outside at the treehouse, where Ellie now played violin on the balcony. And I whispered, "We'll never go back to that version of us." That night I lit a small fire in the backyard, not to destroy, but to release. I burned that photo along with a few letters we never mailed. Ellie watched silently. Then she reached into her jacket and added one of her own. She said nothing, but I knew what it meant. She was done too. Our life now is quieter. Not in a lonely way, but in the most freeing sense. The quiet of not waiting for someone's approval. the quiet of not rehearsing how to be accepted. It's the sound of peace. We go to the farmer's market on Sundays. We host movie nights with our neighbors. Ellie teaches art to younger kids every Friday. And Sarah, she's now being considered for a regional leadership award for her foundation. All of it began with a moment of exclusion and bloomed into a legacy of inclusion. Sometimes people ask me if I regret staying silent that night by the Christmas tree, and the truth is, I don't, because silence gave us the blueprint for something better. It taught us how to move with intention, how to build instead of battle, how to speak with actions instead of fury, that silence was a scalpel, not a sword. There's something powerful about winning quietly, about letting the ones who tried to break you witness your growth from a distance they can't close. That is the final act of justice, to live so fully, so freely, that their absence becomes part of your blessing. Ellie once said, "I think our family is made of tree roots. We go deep and we hold strong, even when people step over us." I smiled, because she was right. We were never flashy. We didn't shout our worth. But we knew how to hold, how to grow, how to rise. One night, as we sat on the balcony of her treehouse watching the stars, Ellie leaned into me and whispered, "Thank you for not letting their silence make me invisible." I kissed her head, tears quietly welling up, and whispered back, "You were never invisible. You were just waiting for the right light." Now I know true revenge isn't about payback. It's about power, the power to choose peace when chaos is offered, the power to build a life so whole that those who hurt you are forced to witness their irrelevance. The victory isn't that they were excluded. The victory is that we stopped needing their inclusion to feel complete. Every so often I hear whispers of them asking about us, through distant cousins, through old friends. They want to know if we're angry, if we'll come back, if there's still a place for them in our new world. And the truth is, we're not angry. We're not cold. We're simply beyond the reach of people who didn't know how to hold what we gave so freely. We don't need to erase them. We just don't need to carry them anymore. And there's a difference. This was never about a Christmas gift. It was about dignity, about choosing to never let a child believe she was less because someone else couldn't love properly. It was about letting that one envelope become a doorway out of a cycle, out of generational coldness, into something warmer, brighter, and far more real. And now we are fully ourselves, not because we were accepted, but because we finally stopped asking. That is the final freedom. That is the legacy Ellie will carry, a life not built on vengeance, but on quiet, unstoppable truth.